Good afternoon. Welcome to the third Tipping the Pain Scale movie screening and panel event that APNC is hosting across the state of North Carolina. If you did not have a chance to watch the movie with us before, we hope you did. If you didn't get a chance to watch it before, the link will still be open tonight. So watch it through the rest of the night. It's a fabulous movie. We hope you got to watch it in advance, but if you didn't, still time. I'd like to thank, before we get started on our panel, I'd like to thank our partners across the state who helped us pull this together. The North Carolina Independent Colleges and Universities, the UNC Systems office, and the North Carolina Harm Reduction Coalition, as well as our host site here in Greensboro, which is the North Carolina Agricultural and Technical Institute here in Greensboro, and in particular, our campus champion, Dr. Vivian Barnett, who really, as soon as we made the call to her, said, yes, we are on board and we're with you. So for those of you who work on campus, you know Vivian Barnett quite well. You might also recognize a couple of folks from the movie here with us today. Before we get started on the panel, I'm going to ask Joseph Green, who you just saw in the movie, to kick us off with a poem and some inspiration to set the tone for the conversation.
Hi, friends. And I say that because I find that no matter where I go, when I have an opportunity to have community with folks who are out doing this very vital, important work, that there is an almost automatic friendship, a sense of family, no matter where I am. And so I say friends, I say family, and I say also thank you for everyone who took the time to watch this movie. It means a lot to me, and I hope it now means a lot to you. You saw me do a poem or two in the film, so I'm not going to do those poems. The poem I'm doing today was inspired by a conversation I had with a friend the other day who also does this work, and I sent them a recording of this poem because I think that folks need to hear every once in a while how important it is for them to keep doing what they do, even though maybe the world isn't applauding them in that moment. It's called For the Choir. Don't stop preaching to the choir, for they may cease to sing. This sermon is for you. When I was a younger man, I had the honor, though I did not recognize it at the time, to listen to my great Uncle John lead the choir at Calvary Baptist Church in Chester, South Carolina. The first few times, even the familial connection failed to arouse the spirit in me. These songs were sung for souls who had known heavy, delivered at the same frequency that transformed slaves to freedom fighters, stiffened the marching spines of a million revolutionaries. I was a punk kid, stuffy nosed and drunk off my own individualistic interests, positioned into a place of privilege by sacrifices from forebears forgotten or never known, definitely not found within the covers of my school books. When the time was appropriate, when the preacher spouted something especially in tune with the spirit, my Uncle John seemed to just know it was time. He would begin with a call and response. Then the choir would break out into a rehearsed song, and then, as if choreographed, the entire congregation joined in. I didn't understand, couldn't comprehend. Hands clean, eyes closed, senses dampened to the suffering surrounding me. I didn't even have a name for my own pain. But ain't that grace? I was blessed to have been awoken to a greater purpose in life and enough time to go back and hear my Uncle John sing one more time before his passing. What I heard in the music that day connected me to a voice that will never be mine alone, merely borrowed, a voice built by those who for all of time have risen to the occasions deemed impossible, accepted missions denied by all others, chosen paths known to be fraught with doom, a voice of welcome declaring amidst the disastrous clamor of history, here you are safe. Here is where healing happens. Here you are no longer alone. A voice that shatters fear, topples regimes, and will stand next to the oppressed, mistreated, and marginalized in light or shadow. until we can all be heard. A voice that preaches to the choir, sings to the congregation, and calls in those who have traditionally been left outside the church's doors. This poem is a sermon of gratitude for those individuals and organizations that use their voice to dismantle despair, break barriers, heal the harm, like home, Lighthouse Home, the lost, or pray for the sick and forgotten. May these words lift up your spirit, carry you a few extra miles in your vital yet oftentimes thankless work. Though your song may be muffled by the overwhelming discord of this world, please do not silence your voice. As long as I am able, I will play herald to your harmonies of hope until the entire congregation joins in. Thank you. Y'all can clap a little louder so they can at least get the feeling of applause.
Thank you, Joseph.
You're welcome. Thank you.
That was a perfect tone and tenor to set us off today. My name is Sarah Potter. I'm the Executive Director of Addiction Professionals of North Carolina. I love the poem that you just said. I love the sentiment that you're kicking us off on, which is that we are the choir, not just us around the table, not just those of us who are in helping professions, not just parents. We are all the choir, and one of the functions of Addiction Professionals of North Carolina, and the reason we're doing this really is to amplify those voices across the state and to bring them to the forefront. One of the other reasons we wanted to do this is that the last couple of years has taken us away from each other in ways that we could not have predicted. And that's impacted us as humans, as organizations, as a system of helping professions. The COVID thing has been hard on everyone, and it's changed the way that we interact. It has raised the awareness of how many people need help, that it's not, do you have a mental health crisis? Are you thinking of suicide? Are you in addiction? Are we talking about prevention? Are we talking about recovery? Actually, what we are talking about is all of us in that chorus. And I think that's the space and time that we sit in right now. And we are pleased and honored in this space to be able to help pull together these voices across the state. Another thing that is unique about this time, I think, is that harm reduction is at the forefront. So in the film, you saw a very heavy focus on harm reduction and the great work that they are doing. They've been fighting that battle for a real long time. They're starting to get the recognition of the importance of that work. Finally, with that comes, lots of scrutiny in the field. And so I think the time for us to be talking about these things right now is unique. And I'm delighted that harm reduction is in the focus right now. We want to stand with our friends at Harm Reduction Coalition and all of the harm reduction folks across the state and country as they grapple with some of the battles that they are going through right now, specifically in regards to this time frame. Our leaders are also fighting their own battles as well. Our public leaders in our state systems are having to grapple with challenges that they never have had to before. So here in North Carolina, our state leaders are completely understaffed. They have been manning, trying to figure out what to do with the pandemic and the response, all the while the problems are amping up in the mental health and addiction space. That's kept them pretty busy. Same thing with our legislators who are trying to figure out what's the best way to go about handling this. We have more complicated funding streams coming in all sorts of ways. What's the best way to handle this? Because of that, they have not been as connected to many folks as they would have liked to be. So I think that's a unique space and time for us to be in, because they've been in head down doing their own work as well. And so we have an opportunity to let them hear from us. They want to hear from us. They care. They want us to help educate them on what are the best pathways forward. And so that's where we are coming from today together as a chorus. How can we go forward to help figure out how we want this to look going forward? It's no surprise that we have not figured out how to handle people's needs in terms of addiction, mental health, or just in the human service space in general. We've not figured out how to do that. And so we have a unique moment in time, I think, right now to level set and say, okay, what do we want this to look like? So that's the reason we're here. As I said, I'm Sarah Potter. For those of you online joining us, thank you so much. Please chime in and let us know what you want to talk about, questions you might have. After we get done today, you will also get a survey. So that survey is not a survey that we are going to use to make some really nice charts and then we're going to put it on our shelf. We are using that to amplify your voice. And so please take the survey. This is our third event. We've had well over 300 people already engaged. We have 4 more to go after today. What that can do is to give us what the song is that we need to paint and sing and the solutions that we need to put forward. So please fill that out because that lets us know where we need to roll up our sleeves, where we need to highlight and amplify, and where we need to dig in a little bit further to come up with some better ideas for how to move forward. So please fill out that survey. With that, I'm going to introduce the panel. Let the panel introduce themselves. To my right is Nia.
Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Nia Adams. I am a senior sports science fitness management student here on the illustrious campus of North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University. This is my 3rd semester working with the Collegiate Recovery Program, and I am super excited to be here and speak with you all today.
Well, my name is Joseph Green, here on the illustrious campus of North Carolina A&T, and I assume you've seen the bio on there, so I'm not going to really go through that, but I am going to share something that you may not know about me from reading my bio, and that is when I was 14, I went to Puerto Rico for a junior Olympic competition in Taekwondo, and I lost bad. And now you know.
You heard it here first.
Yeah.
We're gonna find that. We're gonna find that footage.
Oh, yeah.
I really want to find that. Well, thank y'all. Thank you everybody for allowing me to be here. You know, it's really great. It's an honor. Awesome people here. My name's Tyler Yates. I'm the Syringe Exchange Program Coordinator for GC Stop here in Guilford County, and then I'm also a social work student at the University of North Carolina, Greensboro.
Well, thank you, and thank you to APNC for having us and hosting the film. My name is Greg Williams. I'm a person in long-term recovery, and also the producer of Tipping the Pain Scale. And so we're thrilled that the university and the whole system across the state's been showing this film. It's a privilege to make, you know, social impact films like this, and you don't always find your audience, but often sometimes you do. So really grateful to everybody for tuning in.
Hello all, I'm Dr. CJ, and I am a clinical counselor in the Counseling Center, as well as the coordinator for Aggies for Recovery, the Collegiate Recovery Community here at the North Carolina A&T State University. Just really happy to be here, really happy to be amongst, you know, the choir like Sarah was talking about, and looking forward to our conversations today.
Okay, so let's get started. Let's start by just talking about what stood out in the film to you, what was really striking, what stories really spoke to you as you watched the film or have thought about the film after you watched it.
I mean, for me, I think Roz, was she the one doing the reversals?
Roz, yeah.
Roz, her story stood out to me the most because the 2 overarching things that I got from this was pain and passion, simply because, like we're saying, preaching to the choir, what we do takes a lot of passion. It takes a lot to go out in the street every day and hand out snacks and hand out Narcan. And it's like, no one will just wake up one morning and say, you know what, that's what I want to do every day, all day, without that passion. And so that is the story that stood out to me, because like the work that we do is so important, but we also tend to do it in small spurts, small silos. And when we get to link up, much like this, it's very remarkable.
I think one of the things that still stands out to me, and I might have said this at the last one, I don't know if we have any people who came to the last one that are here at this one, but I have not seen a story or stories like this with as many people of color told in the way that these stories were told. And I know from the community that I come from that there are many people like me who are dealing with this, and we don't often get to see folks who look like us being a part of the solution. Not that they're not there, it's just the people who have the cameras have to make a decision as to who they point them at. And most times that decision is made more for how many people will be able to see this movie when it's over, as opposed to being an accurate representation of the country that we live in. And so I didn't, when I was filmed, I didn't know there were going to be any other people of color in the movie until I saw it. And I was really happy that it wasn't a situation like I found myself in the past, where I was the token person in a space. So that really stood out to me, and couldn't be more proud to be a part of a film that did that.
Mhm.
So for me, of course, my initial thoughts after watching the film was like inspirational. Like, I respect these people. And it was just seeing these people like hit rock bottom and then recovering, and like how they impacted their community once they did recover was just very strong. And I don't remember, I actually wrote it down. I don't remember his name, but he had a
Joseph Green?
alcohol
Oh, no, that means
abuse issue, and it was him and his girlfriend and his mom, and they said that he was foaming at the mouth at the hospital, foaming at the mouth, and they told him like, this is not an emergency. And it's kind of just sad to hear that, because like, when is it emergent? It's like, is an emergency like when they kill themselves? Is it an emergency when they overdose? So like, just hearing that was kind of sad. And then also hearing a lady who was talking about emotional pain. Emotional pain is the driver to addiction. It's the driver to abuse. And so like, us as community leaders, I do feel like it's important to like get to the bottom of like, what is this cause for emotional pain? So we can help the community. And so like, those were the main things that really did stand out. Awesome film, amazing film.
And that was Ricky that you were talking about,
Ricky?
and
Okay,
of
yeah.
Ricky's Law. So, yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I agree with what you just said. When is enough enough? Why do we have to wait until this moment to take a step to intervene in the deaths and the emotional pain and everything else? Over the past several years, I've been hearing more and more and more about ACEs scores, looking at adverse childhood experiences and the correlation between substance use prevalence and the rates of addiction and adverse experiences as a child. We know that there's a direct correlation. So I think if we can start intervening at an earlier age, we'll be able to kind of stop some of this before it, gets to where it can kill somebody. I really related with a lot of the stuff that Roz was doing, working in harm reduction, doing syringe exchange, syringe access programs. It's definitely tough work. It's one of the things that really stood out to me in the film is like just the idea that like, we're out here, we see people sleeping outside with no clothes on and borderline overdosing. And we're okay with it. Policymakers are we're okay with, taking funding away from services and putting it towards incarceration. And I think that that's what, that really needs to change.
Yeah.
Well, and I've had an opportunity to make a couple films on this issue. And I think what was cool about what Jeff Riley was able to do with this project was the different characters, but show like everyone always wants to know, like, what's the answer to addiction, right? Like, the journalist asks, give me the, we just go Portugal, like, yeah, what do we do, right? And it just, and part of it's like in this format, we're able to get into the nuance and get into the gray and get into the layers, and that was very, it was very cool to be able to find people doing work at different layers of society. So whether it's street outreach or mayor of a city, or a state legislator, or everything in between, or cultural, there's a lot of layers to change here, and hopefully we were able to kind of communicate some of that there's answers, but it's going to take different sectors of society.
Yeah. What I liked everything about it because we're hosting it. But what really stood out to me is the sentiment that the way that we have been looking at this it really has to be a shift, an entire shift in how we are thinking about these things. And I think that also starts with us in the field, all the helping professions in the field, talking to each other, because when you ask that question, do you know what's that one answer? We don't know what's that one answer. And so coming together in a space where we can be vulnerable enough to say, okay, this is working well here. I don't know about this part. Like, we're probably not doing a great job over here. We could be doing better over there, but being together enough in that commitment to moving us forward really stood out to me. And I loved that you focus on what we're doing now and what's working now, and then how that can actually change policy. I thought was really brilliant about the way that it happened. But what Tyler said, I want to pick back up, because he said two things that I want to kick us off with. One, he talked about ACEs scores and keying into that and intervening sooner. Joseph has had a lot of experience working in the prevention space, as have I. I think when you think about this last few years, even before then, really, we and our kids, our whole communities, our kids have been experiencing together, if you look at that list, more of them. So it's not just what's my score, what's your score, it is our collective score, and our communities are experiencing this. And I think that's why we're all kind of at the space that we're at now, like, oh, I don't know. So I appreciated that. And I think as a field of helpers, we're used to kind of being the underdog. We often come in with our own stuff, right? We don't necessarily come to this work expecting to make $1 million. We come into the work expecting that we can help someone not suffer the harms that we have, or our family has, or the people we care about have. And so I appreciate Tyler at least kicking in on how hard that work is and how taxing it is. And I think that is part of the conversation that we need to be having, is how are we together coming into the space, because we've been through all our own trauma, and then now we are also going through it again and again, and at levels and ways that we haven't had to before. And I think just acknowledging that, I've asked Tyler just personally, what are you doing to take care of it? How are you? What are your strategies? How are you handling it? I think us as helpers, it's not our first thought. It's our first thought is, how can I help others? And so I want to kick us off with that part of the conversation, because I think as we're talking about the workforce crisis, we have people leaving left and right, and they're burning out, which really is, I think, responding to their own stuff. I can't do it anymore. Not just I'm not getting paid enough. I can't do it anymore. I'm melting down. So I want to just at least invite thoughts about that, because I think it's an important piece.
May I jump in?
Yeah.
Real quick? Yeah. I didn't like the title of the movie when I first heard it. I didn't get it completely until I saw the movie, what they were talking about when they said tipping the pain scale.
Yeah.
And I was like, it's too wordy. People aren't going to know it's about addiction, recovery. That was my first thought. And then after seeing the movie, and especially Dr. Nzinga's comments, which frame the movie so well, there needs to be a reframing of the conversation about what it is we are working together as a workforce to fix. And when we talk about working with young people or trying to get whether or not we have the solutions, I think we have more solutions than we have buy-in. And I feel a lot of the buy-in has to do with people thinking that this problem is different than that problem. When whatever it is, if we work on the pain of our young people, if we work on the pain of our society, there's going to be a lot of things that fall, dominoes that fall in a good direction. And I have that problem working in the prevention space in schools, because when I say I have a prevention program, schools here, well, does that mean we have a drug problem? And so when I say we have a wellness program as opposed to a prevention program, they hear, oh, we're doing mindfulness and we're going to make sure that we're building the same level of perseverance in our young people, and we're giving them the same skills, but other people see that they have a buy-in to that as opposed to how it's being framed right now. So not necessarily a direct response to what you were saying, but it's what jumped in my head as something that needs to be thought about. And what I thought, again, the movie introduced well. Each of the things that the different folks in the movie did was a response to a type of pain that was happening in their community. And it happened to be, focused around this particular thing. But if we did more advocacy, if we did more upstream youth work, if we did more humane human care as far as it does harm reduction, whether it be mental health or any other thing, there would, I think that greater change would happen. And so that's just yeah, I don't know how to put a penny on that or a period on that, but that's the thought.
So for me, like, I hear you. And that for me connects a lot to what Greg said about, well, what's the answer? What's the solution to addiction? And the first thing that always jumps in my mind is like, well, if I were some of the higher ups and legislators and policymakers that I know personally, they'd watch it and be like, oh my goodness, get them some grant funding right now. And it's not that simple, because like we're talking about, the pain is there, right? And it's not necessarily, well, just throw money at it and that'll fix it. Because the other problem with that is, okay, yeah, sure, we can throw grant money at it, but you've got requirements that are cookie cutter that don't fix this. There's too much gray, okay? That's why you have to kind of finagle, well, I kind of fit in this category, let me submit and hope for the best. But it still doesn't support the work you're doing. We're building brand new initiatives and brand new coalitions, even though we've got them. We just don't have bodies, or we don't have staff, or we are running out and burning out like, most of our clientele are. And I feel as though getting more people into these pockets to turn them out from being pockets and, really getting to the bottom of things. It's not just, oh, that it's a moral issue, or, oh, it's just a disease. It is all these psychosocial factors. It is the community strain. It is this pain that goes from different, symbols for people, levels, surface, deep, whatever. It's getting to those things. And, then that's how you connect a resource. Not so much, oh, you fall into this category, go over there. Or, oh, you fall into that category, get you some grant money.
Yeah. While you're talking already, I think universities, colleges, community colleges are in also a space of shifting how they're thinking about what's important on their campuses, how they're going to invite students. So as a parent of a college student, and I have a high schooler as well, if she were going next year, what I would be looking for as a parent is, how is my student going to be supported in this space specifically? What are the resources on campus for mental health? What are the resources on campus for making sure that their bodies and minds are being fed in a way that they know how to take care of themselves? Is there a collegiate recovery center on campus? What wellness services are there? And that's a very different way of choosing a school than there ever has been before. And so I think that's a shift that universities can really make. And it's a different way of thinking about, how do you market yourself to potential students? And so are there things that are happening either on this campus or in this area? Because we all see our own little spaces and, oh, there's this really great thing that we're doing that works. So what can we share out there that is good about the services that we're providing here, the things that we're trying to do, have been doing, or in this area. I want to make sure that those stories come out from this region.
Absolutely, absolutely. So for A&T specifically, our Aggies for Recovery program, the biggest thing that we push is that we normalize recovery for everybody. We're not oh, if you are not sober, you can't be a member. There's no membership, right? It's open to the entire campus, because I don't want to create more silos. I don't want you to just, take a label and run away with it, and so that means that also our student body that's kind of walking around here every day is aware of recovery, is aware of, what overdose looks like, what addiction looks like, and how that translates. You made a great point about, as a parent, when I go to these orientations with my student, they probably don't know what questions to ask, and I know what I'm looking for. But you also have to kind of operate on two levels, and we try to do that, right? It's like, okay, we can present this in such a way that is relevant for our higher ups that fund us. We can present this in a way that is for a parent to understand this at orientation. But what's really important, what really keeps our program and engaged with students, is how we approach and talk to them. So like all of our programming, we stream it live on the internet. We stream it on IG, Twitter, Facebook, whatever, so that they are not pressured to like, oh, well, I got to come in here and admit all the stuff and whatever. No, you can join us leisurely. You don't have to do that. You can define this for yourself. And I think that's a really strong proponent of something that we do, simply because we want them to have the autonomy. We want them to have the independence, and we want them to be able to make a choice that they do get into these positions of, oh, well, this is a resource I can trust, and they tell us about more resources on campus. Oh, I know that this is an issue that may be connected to this because of some of the content I've heard them say. And it makes sense because they use, examples or events, and students tell their stories so that I can better connect, and it's not clinical jargon. And so a lot of that is what we're doing on this campus. We're normalizing so that when they leave this campus, they grow up to become parents that ask their children's universities these questions, to be able to mitigate and self-regulate some emotional pain and know how to cope healthy and effectively.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off what Dr. CJ was saying, one thing about counseling services on this campus is like anything that you can think of, they probably have a program for it. I know each week I lead Get Off the Struggle Bus with, Get Off the Struggle Bus, which is the collegiate recovery program here. And so each week, like, we do reflections. It may not just be solely about addiction. It's also understanding your addiction, how to reach out for help, toxic relationships, topics of those. And so also A&T provides free counseling. So, to get regular counseling, you usually have to go through your insurance or you have to pay for it. Like, you don't have to do any of that. It's all available here. It's all free. And so that is another way that we do, help the student body if they do need mental health work or help.
What's it called? The thing that you run?
Collegiate recovery
No,
program?
no, the name of the program.
Get
Get off the struggle bus. Oh, I
yes.
just, I was like, yeah.
There's gonna be a poem.
And at the community sort of regional space, are there things that stand out to you that are strong, something that we want to share out?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of collaboration going on between agencies. I think COVID has really brought to light the importance of agencies working together and coming together to share resources, because if everybody's holding their resources in those silos that you're talking about, nobody's going to get services. So it's about talking about these resources, sharing these resources, and making sure that everybody has access to them. And I think that's something that Guilford County as a whole is doing really well.
I'm not from North Carolina, but just speaking about when organizations work well together, there's one of the hardest things for people to do is get the word out about the work that they're doing. That's just, it's always the smallest line item on a budget, the communications or the budget to promote. And I think that one of the easiest ways for organizations to work together is to look at that line item of how are we going to tell people about what we do, the marketing part, and trying to find ways to promote together. It doesn't always mean you have to build a website together where all the resources are on or whatever, but there's a way to, if we're here to do the work, it doesn't always have to be in our house, right? And so maybe we don't have the capacity, maybe there's a smaller organization that doesn't have the budget, but if we're trying to get people into services, every time I talk about my organization, there should be an attachment or a link or this is what else is happening in North Carolina. If you can't get through to us, this is also here. So I just wanted to throw that in, that it's part of the collaboration. It doesn't always have, the healing belongs to the entire community. And so maybe we could start pooling some of the bill also as the entire community.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. What you said, Dr. CJ, a little bit earlier anchors in with what you just said, Joseph, that collaboration, how we're marketing ourselves, how we're talking about that. And you started to go down that path. The way that the funding streams and the grants are laid out does not lend itself to that. So that is so important for how we come up with what's the solution. That is such an important piece. But yeah, our sort of funding that is coming down is still very fragmented and little bits at a time, bit by bit by bit. And so, when we are talking with policymakers, I know that at the federal level, there's lots of arguing going on about funding, continuing resolutions, and how that's going to happen. That kind of arguing and figuring out and laying out funding in this piece by piece by piece sort of fabric that we all as a community are trying to figure out how to fit together. And then once we do, a piece disappears is one thing that if I have a wish for this time frame is once the focus on the demand that we have for mental health and substance use, the huge rates go back down. Hopefully, when we get through that and funding starts to go back to actually a more normal space, because there's a lot of money right now, I hope that what we are doing is looking at payer reforms, how we are essentially changing that landscape, that funding landscape that is very fragmented, in a way that promotes us working together for the better of the person, not in service of this rule or that rule or it. So are there other policy related things that stand out to you guys as being important? Just fast forward 2 years. We know how the system works now and what's not working. In 2 years, let's pretend everyone is sort of back to a place of wellness. The funding has gone down to a normal level again. What's the thing that you would have hoped that us having gone through all of this pain and struggle and all the blood, sweat, and tears that we all put into this work, what would you want to see changed at the end of that for the better?
Well, addiction's interesting when you think about healthcare funding in a sense where, most healthcare providers deal with, 3 payers, right? Medicare, Medicaid, and private insurance. And in addiction or mental health, we deal mostly in addiction, but a little mental health too. We deal with those 3, but we also deal with grants and that fund a vast majority of services. And so there's sort of like this 4th payer that isolates and fragments the community. One thing that's really important, as Tyler said, it's this issue, like we need to meet people where they're at. And we developed a lot of these programs with the best knowledge we had at the time, whether it was in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and we've been funding them the same way, which was like, okay, so if we remove somebody from their community and we put them in a residential program, then they're physically removed from the substance, that's the best approach. And that still, works for some, but that doesn't meet the demand or the need for all. And so there's different kinds of care for different kinds of people, and there's different ways to engage people at their different levels of readiness. And so the big fix, the big need is that the people who are have the passion, the people who are willing to to meet the need should be celebrated and encouraged to meet that person at any stage of readiness, at any stage of willingness, and not have to find this code or that code or this box, and this square peg to put them in, but have some flexible, third-party reimbursement that can meet the nature of the condition, because it's a spectrum illness that nobody presents the same, and we want the one answer for the one person, but we don't do that in diabetes. We don't do that in oncology. We don't do that in heart disease. Why do we do it in substance use?
Spot on. I definitely, I work almost every day with, trying to get folks into treatment, and it is unbelievable how hard it is for people that want treatment to get into treatment. There are so many barriers, if they're not testing positive for opioids because our supply is contaminated and there's fentanyl in it, then they're not going to be getting buprenorphine for detox, and they leave. Folks are being turned away for abscesses, all the things that kind of come along with substance use. They're being turned away for, and I think that we really need to look at why that is, and it all goes back to stigma. Every bit of it does. So, looking at that, and then also doing away with the X waiver. We need doctors out there on the streets that are able to prescribe buprenorphine, just like any other medication.
To jump, were you done with your point?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, to jump off of that, because the stigma, this is a word that follows this conversation. And one of the things that I think we need to be talking about doing is the culture shift. This film is, to be clear, is also a piece of artistic activism, right? Like, the idea of it is, if we tell more stories and show more good work, then people will see it, and there will be an identification of what is really making a difference. That connection creates a form of empathy, and then the voting happens and people will hold folks accountable, right? That's the idea behind it. But when our organizations have so many passionate people who are not asked to tell their story, it's not recorded, it's not shared, we get these spaces where we get together and we're like, yo, it, and you can see it in his face because he's seen it personally. But the people on, I keep saying Capitol Hill because I don't know what they call it in each town we go to, but I live in DC. So the people on Capitol Hill don't have to see it in front of them when they go into their rooms to make the decisions about where the money goes. But that is something that I think, as organizations, again, if we were going to pool money or come together or get a grant and as a coalition, would be towards trying to take some of this story, transmogrify it from the pain to tools of healing, and then get it out there, because a lot of people are voting with what they believe is their common sense. And it's like this, well, it makes sense to do this, or to separate people from society and let them go get well and then come back. Or it makes sense to punish someone for selling a substance that harms someone else. It makes sense but the stories of the actual people speak contrary to that. And so I think that's, if we're gonna, the only way to really combat stigma, because statistics aren't doing it, the statistics are larger than they've ever been, and we keep throwing these 100,000 people number at folks, and it still doesn't seem to be sticking to their ribs, but story does. So I think that's something to explore, and I think that's something that the film hits on the head, and why we need more representation of the positive sides of recovery out in the community.
Yeah.
Mic drop.
Nobody else has it. We're done now. No. Yeah, let me see if I can articulate what I'm thinking. So when I hear stigma, I immediately think institutional marginalization and racism that is built in. It's not just about race, though. It's about keeping people down and all of the layers that are in there. So when I hear stigma, I hear a feeling, I hear empathy, I hear moral judgment. But what I want to hear and see is change in those very hard things that need to get changed. So I think fighting stigma is really important because we need to be doing everything we can to reduce barriers to reaching out for help, increase access to treatment. And that's, I think, one piece of it, but I think it's not all. It's not the whole piece of it. Like I want to see actually how the regulations is changing, how the money and how it's coming down is changing. All those rules are changing. Like I want to see that change.
Yeah, I agree with you, but I think one begets the other. When I think about the movement of same-sex marriage, before that was something that was popularized enough that people could vote to make it so. And by the way, I keep talking to the microphone because someone told me earlier, you're not talking to the camera, you're talking to the microphone. And I've been staring this thing down. So if that looks weird to y'all, that's why. All right, now I'm back to the camera. I've been doing this, I just realized this whole time. The microphone can see me. The idea is that when you started seeing positive representations of gay couples in television, when you started seeing famous people come out and that affect or them cause them to lose their job, and then they could use their platform to advocate for change, is when it became all right for politicians to start supporting things that they might have lost their jobs for if they had supported it 10 years earlier. And so I see the attention to that, the changing of the cultural idea of it being what begets, while the other work is still happening, but begets the actual, like the first time a bipartisan group actually makes votes on something that is definitively going to change the way money or things are spent. Please. Come at me.
Well, no, when you first saw this film, we got the chance to show it at the APNC conference last fall. And I always have these memories of like the early film screenings and that I'll never forget. And after the film screening, a woman came up from Western rural North Carolina, who's like just getting a grassroots addiction program. And she said, I've been thinking about running for state legislator because my representative, doesn't get this issue. And I've been, doing it. And it was watching Lauren, right? Watching what Lauren chose to do and her path where she was, advocating as an ally, as an activist. And then she was asked to be, in that seat, right? And I think part of what's brilliant about what she's doing is she's doing it in a state very much like North Carolina, split down the middle. Like she is passing unanimous laws at the state legislature on this issue because she's leading from inside that house, right? And she works with Republicans, she works with Democrats, like, and she every year she's passing. I mean, they just got $87 million in some state law in Washington because of some of the work that she's doing. And so, it was, you were at the screening in Las Vegas where, Roz saw that and she's like, oh, I'm going to run, and so like, that's part of it too, is I think, we address stigma, not just kind of from the cultural perspective or from the empathy standpoint, but part of, raising up some of these stories or pointing a camera at some of these stories is to inspire others, right? And to inspire others. And I think part of our next frontier on this issue is getting people in recovery in those seats. We're talking about a recovery set aside. We're talking about $1 billion more in the block grant. That stuff doesn't happen if allies and people in recovery aren't in those policy seats. So it's really important, I think, for us to also, for those of us who are beaten down, maybe traumatized from working on the front lines of the field, but all the knowledge that you have from those decades, there's a policy table here that needs your voice too.
And that raises a great point. It's something I've just kind of been kicking around with here. It's like, we can try to do all those things, but sometimes we're bogged down because we're doing the work. And it's like, if we leave the helm of doing the work's not going to get done. But those are all awesome points. And so when Tyler was saying, you know, barriers to treatment, the first thing I thought, yeah, treatment's expensive. That's number one. Treatment is expensive. And it's like, why can't it be a normalized form of healthcare, like behavioral health, like physical medical care? And I think, to both of your points, it is about normalizing all of that, normalizing not only the work we do and the empathy and the passion we show in it, but also coming from inside out to normalize as well. Because, you know, just like the mayor in the movie, you know, none of this stuff would have happened if he did not have his recovery experience, if he did not connect with those people, if he did not, you know, start looking at legislation and, you know, really saying something about it and making the change from the inside out and reaching outside to those collaborators and those allies to, you know, start doing more work collaboratively inside and out.
Thank you for making that point back to the raising up leadership in the policy space, certainly in our leaders. But I think there's lots of ways that we can decidedly raise up leadership. There's policy and, you know, elected offices. Those go all over. I mean, school board, county commission, those are all over. And so it doesn't have to be, I don't think, an election. It can be volunteering to sit on a committee, signing up for that with your county commissioners, or
taking over your PTA meeting and saying, we're doing this program.
Yeah, so there's lots of ways to do that, but thank you for making that connection explicit. I think as a field of helpers, we are kind of used to being the folks who never have enough money to do everything we need to do. There's always more people than we can possibly help. We're kind of used to being in that underdog position. Like, I'm just going to keep on chugging. I do think that raising up leadership in all ways, and I think this has to do with our college students, which is one of the reasons that we are on a college campus now, is decidedly making sure that we have the voices that are representative of the people that we are working with. And that involves actively raising up women in this field, African Americans in this field, to make sure that they are at the table when we're in decision-making spaces, so that you don't have 50 people from every agency in an executive role that looks like me making a decision for, you know, the community. So I think lots of ways to do that. And I think that what you said was really important in that sort of decision-making leadership, of course, elected official, but non-elected sort of positions of power too. So I think we have a couple more minutes before we take some questions from our friends online.
Yeah, ask us questions, by the way, in the chat.
Yeah. So you want to go ahead and switch over?
Oh, no, I was just saying, I was telling people that if they wanted to get in on that, this would be the time. But we got about 8 minutes.
So any other sort of final, what did we not touch on that you thought we would?
I think a bit of attention on young people, like younger than college. And instead of me just saying what I'm thinking, can I ask it in the form of a question to the group?
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you. That was like you were not going to do it anyway, but I appreciate it. And I like the way we've been forming these questions. What positive thing have you seen in the K through 12 space in North Carolina that you would like to lift up to the parents who are listening? And even I'm sure there's people who work in school systems, whether resource counselors or social workers or whatever. Like what have you seen and what
The establishment of a recovery high school is something I never thought was possible in North Carolina, and it is amazing. It is flourishing
Can you give some detail as to about what that is for people who
Yeah,
may not have
so
heard of
for
Recovery
Recovery
High
High
School?
School, it's like kind of like our collegiate recovery program, right? Where we support students in recovery, students that are trying to kind of, enforce a recovery lifestyle from substance misuse or whatever, but it's at a younger age range, right? It's actually going into public schools. It is a part of that foundational school that says, hey, it's not exactly like, we notice you're having problems in class, go see the guidance counselor. This is a specific space for support, and this is what recovery can mean. Is this something that you would like to be a part of? And that intervenes with students in K through 12. It's like, not only are we getting them before they go to college, we are getting them in that stage of, I'm trying to find where I fit in, that this is where my use usually starts. I know on our campus starts anywhere between 8th grade and the summer before they get to college. And so this is an intervention point that is powerful. And it's like to know that support is there and to have that collaboration with other colleges that have collegiate recovery programs to give a warm handoff is remarkable. Like it is wraparound support, like completely.
Yeah.
Go.
I'm going to talk from two different spaces because I know the prevention landscape very well. There are lots of programs that do a lot of really great things. From the individual level, I think what we're seeing is teachers, God love them, making a change, a decided shift and focus on the mental health and the well-being of our students. I have heard, these are some of the good stories I hear. I hear lots of stories. Some of the good stories I have heard are really teachers taking the time to say, are you okay? What's going on with you? And I think that's happening more. We had a real shift for a real long time where teachers were focused on testing, and that was the most important thing, making sure you get to end of grade level performance. And they would bring some outsiders in to do some things. Often those are prevention folks, but I think teachers are getting it. Oh, the social and emotional learning standards are really important. We're gonna focus on that. So I think that is a positive thing. It's not a specific program, but it is something that I've noticed a real shift in. And so I wanna applaud all teachers who take the time, if you notice a student looks a little off, to take the time to say, okay, are you okay? Are you okay? What do you need? I think those little things mean a lot. I think we're fortunate in North Carolina that there's, as I said, a lot of kinds of prevention programs. Many of those, the research that underpin the theory of those programs was done so long ago that research, before cell phones were a thing, before COVID was a thing, before a year of e-learning in your bedroom was a thing, is not the full landscape of what we need to be funding. It's going to take a real long time for that research to catch up, and it's expensive. So I applaud our Department of Health and Human Services here in the prevention space for earmarking some funds in recognition of that. They put it out to communities saying, we want to fund some innovation in this space, some of that extra, block grant money we're talking about. We want to fund some innovation. Tell us what you need. Of course, we don't want to fund things that are, completely out of the blue ideas. It has to be anchored in what we know is working from our space that we're sitting in. So I think that is a forward movement that I want to applaud, at least understanding that prevention is effective, but what we have available to us that is evidence-based right now, that evidence is not caught up. So I think that's good too. Yeah.
Yeah, just one other button to put on that. That sentiment of the teachers showing that extra level of care and concern. The focus on testing that existed before that was a pressure that was coming down from on high, because I know very few teachers who got into teaching because they were really passionate about testing, right? Not a lot. That's not really why they go there. It's because they had a teacher at some point that probably touched them in a way that they wanted to go back and do that same work. And then they got into the system and realized that the only way we've decided that it's important to gauge the health or the possible success of a young person is through numbers. And what I wanted to say to parents is we have this resurgence of parents being more active in the school boards and going to the meetings and so on and so forth. And there are some things that we're focusing on that maybe we should try to take our attention and more focus on the social emotional learning of our young people, and say to our school systems that yes, testing has its place, but it's taking up too much of the pie. Because having worked with young people for the last 15 years, I can tell you, you would rather your young person graduate with a high emotional maturity rather than a high GPA, but not knowing how to take care of themselves in the world. One can be rebounded from. The other takes them most often down a road that will end with them trying to solve that problem with something that is very unhealthy. So I think it's about a priority, and also understanding that life is long and that we want to make sure that our young people have those skills that they learn in these prevention programs, and that it shouldn't be something that comes outside of the school. It should be ubiquitous and baked into what education is.
And our communities and our families. You know, there's not, to your point about what's the answer, there's not one layer, one program. It is lots of layers. Our young people have to see their individual teachers reaching out and caring for them. They have to see their schools bringing in people to support their resilience and their wellness, and to teach them about what skills they learn in prevention programs. It's helping families do their best to parent, especially if you come from a place of prior trauma. You don't necessarily know how to be the best parent. You got to learn that. It's not second nature. And supporting our families, the students have to see that too. Our communities have to be healthy. So it's lots of layers. It's not one thing, and it's lots of layers through time that really makes a difference with what you're saying.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Also, I to be clear, I wasn't saying it was one thing. Were you saying that to me?
No.
Okay.
I'm putting
if it was one thing, it'd be Skittles.
No, I'm putting an exclamation point on that and saying, and also, yes, and also. And I think with that, we can take a couple of questions, or take some questions from our friends at home.
So we've had a lot of conversation going on over here. Yeah, this has been a great conversation. Two things really quickly. Nia, could you tell us a little bit more about Get Off the Struggle Bus, and can folks access that?
Yeah, so Get Off the Struggle Bus, like I was saying earlier, each week there's different topics that we give to students so they can really just like reflect and better understand like what they're struggling with. So for example, last week it was toxic relationships. And so what we did, we explained like characteristics of a toxic relationship. We described characteristics of like how you can identify a toxic relationship, and then a reflection question at the end, like how can you overcome this? How can you identify this? How can you move past this? So the Collegiate Recovery Get Off the Struggle Bus is open to the entire student body. It's every single Tuesday, filmed via Zoom, and you can join. It's open to everyone. So it's sent out with a access code and all of that.
And you can watch it on live stream. NCAT_Aggies, the number 4 recovery.
We'll get that out to the group.
You said two things.
Yeah, what was the second thing?
You said two things.
Oh.
You said two things quick.
Yeah, that's my fault. As a student,
Yes.
Why do you think it's important for an HBCU like A&T to have a CRC?
Of course. So just starting off, like I feel like for years, just mental health, like in the Black community in general has always been like looked down on. It's either, you know, my pride's too strong, like, you know, I'm a strong woman, I'm a strong man, I don't need the help. But at the end of the day, like I just really think like it's important to understand like it's okay to be hurt. It's okay to seek help, especially like if you know like where you want to go, and even if you don't, it's like taking the next step like is important. Like realizing you have an issue is one thing, but actually like taking the next step to overcome those issues is another. And so I think it's just very important because like the collegiate recovery program here at A&T, like you are in a space where, you know, people look like you guys may have the same experience, you guys may have the same major. And so just like being in a space with people who are kind of similar to you, I feel like is more impactful and growing and becoming like a better you, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Of course.
Tyler, beyond syringes and Narcan, what other resources does North Carolina Harm Reduction Coalition provide?
Well, so I don't work with NCHRC. I work with the Guilford County solution to the opioid problem. You know, we go out into the community and we provide counseling, case management. You know, we can help folks with like general wellness checks. We have a nurse that hangs out at our clinic, you know, and then just education. You know, we try to teach folks safer using practices, just talk to them about harm reduction and ways that they can stay safe, and let them know that, you know, if there's ever a point in their life where they decide that, you know, they want to seek recovery or something, that we're there and we'll, you know, we'll support them in that.
Another question we have here is, and I guess this is kind of out to anyone, how do we share the reality of our stories we see in the field without being exploitive or contributing to the stigma and stereotypes that are already present?
You want to start that? Go ahead. No, you see, I think there's a reason why we both lit up. Go ahead.
Well, I think it's, I mean, you know, part of it is, you know, focusing on the positive and the solution and not being shy about that. You know, it's people, you know, people will often say, you know, I've never heard that part of the story, or I've never heard that. And there's a reason, like there's, you know, for 30, 40 years, there's one way to tell an addiction story, right? There's one depiction of a person with addiction. And, you know, at 12, 13 years old, I saw what an addict looked like in my mind, in my head, because of what was given to me through the stories that were told. And I was not shown, you know, people in my community, people in my family who had solved that issue in their life, or who had been through that. And I think, of course, there's reality and truth in a lot of the filmmaking and storytelling around addiction. There's a lot of pain, there's a lot of drama. That is not a false reality, but it is not the only reality. And I think so much of what we shy away from, whether because we're marginalized as people who are helpers because of the marginalized issue or not, we're too shy about sharing the other side of the story. You know, there's 20-some million suffering, and there's 23 million in recovery and their families, right? Like there is definitely two sides, but the proportion of solution-oriented stories are just not out there. So
yeah, and I said everything I would say, and I just want to add one part to that. Own it. If you can't trust someone else to tell your story, tell your story. And so organizations should be investing in developing storytelling tools for the people that they serve, right? And it's multifaceted what you get from it. Not only do you get the opportunity for someone to speak for themselves, but you're giving them a tool with which they can then operate better in the world. When a person has autonomy over their own story, they start realizing that they're the primary author and not the world around them. So there's the twofold win there. I get to tell you what it was like, what my miracle moment was, how I stay strong in and now I can tell that to my family members. I can use that to get closer to my children. I can take some of the stigma out of being a person who's in open recovery at my job and then lead a path for someone else. This is not, to be clear, a antithesis to the anonymous space. How you get well is your way of how you get well. But when you have the ability to share and are given the tools with which to do it in a healthy way, it opens the door for somebody else Now someone sees me in recovery and they didn't know what that looked like. They thought they were suffering by themselves. I know that I didn't go to AA for so long because the only depictions I'd ever seen of it were dingy rooms with people who were looking like, if I go in that room, then I must be like them, then I don't want to go in that room. And so bringing a light and a camera into some of those spaces, I think is important.
And also just one last, you know, your social feeds are important, your organizational social feeds are important, but telling these stories outside of the algorithms, because, you know, while preaching to the choir is very important, the school boards, the university trustee meetings, the faculty meetings, the community zone. Honestly, with all this funding, the biggest policy barrier that faces this issue is local zoning boards. Local zoning board meetings, when people are trying to open programs in communities, is where stories are going to be the most important in the next 5 to 10 years, because there is funding coming, there is more resources coming, but that requires people to be able to open syringe programs, that requires people to open college recovery programs, that requires people to open inpatient, outpatient, primary care clinics for people who are suffering. And when people try to do that in communities, people come out of the woodwork to stop that. And we need these stories at the local level in those zoning board meetings.
And I'm sure you would welcome those stories, right?
Yeah, I Jeff and I have a new project kind of around that.
I've been trying to tee this up.
Yeah, we got a new film. You know, one thing about local zoning board meetings is that they all went on Zoom. So all the very not nice things people say about people like us is now all recorded on YouTube. So we will be putting that on blast in the very near future.
Sweet. Come for us, son. We got technology.
Zero, we can screen those. Yes. And of course, sharing with your association, with APNC, we are really easy to find. If you have a question about what's the best way, who's the best to connect with, we're happy to sit with you and process that, think about it, connect you to the right folks if they're not us, if it's Greg, if it's Joseph, happy to do that.
So I want to ask again to the to our local panelists here, what are some other resources in this area that folks should be aware of that we can maybe link them to when we put this up online?
North Carolina Survivors Union. You know, they're a grassroots harm reduction organization here in town that's doing some really amazing work, you know, a lot of advocacy, you know, and also out in the streets doing the thing, meeting people where they're at. You know, Daymark, ARCA, there's local programs in the area as well. Caring services that are, you know, able to provide treatment to folks that are living with a substance use disorder.
Can I ask a question? Where, if I was listening and I wanted to go to like the place that had a lot of this listed, where would I go? Because you just named a lot of names, but like is there a consolidated space or resource for people?
I don't think there's a website that has all that put together.
Not all of it put together. Our counseling center does have just kind of a community resource guide that we use to refer clients. And so it is on the ncat.edu website. Just search up counseling services and click the resource guide. It names just about everything and it's got extra stuff too. I know we are starting to partner. There are more agencies kind of popping up in our area locally. MindPath being one of them, as well as I want to say there's another one, but I'm noticing that some of them, while they are privately owned, they have made the effort to like get on just about every insurance board or in Medicaid possible so that they can provide the service. So these are real people doing real work. So that's awesome.
And then the local LME MCO Sandhills, you can call their number or go online and they'll have resources listed.
You talk to the microphone.
I keep talking to the microphone.
Oh, you're so easy to talk to, microphone.
It's listening.
It's listening.
It actually listens.
What else? What else do we have? just so you know, if we don't get through all the questions as a follow-up, what y'all are going to do for us is answer the survey so that we can put this together in a full picture, both in video, but also in writing of what came up. But also we will answer the questions that came in that we didn't get to perhaps today. So we'll also send that back out to everyone who's registered, as well as some of the resources that we specifically talked about today. So what other questions do we have?
I think that's the end of it.
Okay.
Sorry, he's trying to navigate responding to someone. Someone asked if APNC would compile a list of these resources in this area. And I think, yes, the answer is absolutely. You should, hopefully we'll get something up on our website soon.
The answer is yes, and you all can hear Ariel's voice. She is gonna head us up with making sure that that happens. So thanks to Ariel.
Someone's to-do list just got a little bigger.
So while we're waiting to see, just make sure there's no other final thoughts or questions. Do we want to do some closing thoughts for what stood out about the conversation we had today?
We have one or
What
two
feels
more
good?
questions.
Oh, we have
Oh.
a couple more. Okay,
Yeah, so
good.
one more just dropped in. We've talked about this in a couple different areas, but we'll ask more directly here. Greg's comment earlier about the layers to change. How do we find the right layer for ourselves? Or how do we find what part of the system to go after, whether it's ACEs, like Tyler said, harm reduction, policy, et cetera?
Great question.
Yeah.
You know, it's, and there's no great answer to it. It's, you know, part of it is about finding your passion, you know, and figuring out, you know, for me, I'm not somebody who can sit across from somebody day in, day out and hold their hand and walk them through this illness. But I realized I had a passion for empowering others to tell their stories, you know, and so I chose to do this work from behind the camera and be able to amplify stories. And so, but I learned that about myself. Like, I just, you know, I'm a policy geek and a storyteller, and that's just who I am. And you know, so I think understanding who you're not is almost as important as understanding who you are in this space, and whether you're a presenter, a storyteller, a policy person, you know, a clinical person, somebody who's willing to hold people's hand, meet them on the street. You know, I think that's really, you know, a personal journey, just as my own recovery journey, figuring out what part of the puzzle piece I fit into.
Yeah, I think tacking on with passion is also just maybe looking at pieces of your own identity can be helpful. I know for me, the reason I'm so passionate about my program and being on an HBCU campus with this program is because BIPOC students, BIPOC people, BIPOC populations are severely underrepresented and marginalized and not as help seeking as, you know, other cultures and populations. And so, you know, even for me, like, as a result of that, it's like, okay, we've conquered one HBCU. Let's go consult with the other ones. Let's get them to start programs so that we can reach these populations. And that is, you know, it's a silo, like I was saying before, but finding that pocket and then expanding that pocket becomes important.
I would also say that it doesn't have to feel like it could move a mountain to actually move a mountain. Do you bake cookies? Do you want to give some of that to people who are out doing this work? Do you know how to sew or knit? Is that something that you know how to do? There are places where people are going to seek recovery that need pieces of clothing that could use something that was handmade and authentic to remind them of their humanity. Like, what is it that you do? There's somebody who could use that. And that's of an extreme value, because if everyone did, if everyone just did a little bit more, that would be a whole lot of change. I don't think you should compared necessarily to the folks that you see in the film. Most of us is what we're doing like for our living, but if you're doing something else with that little bit of time, passion, or talent that you have, there's somebody out there who could benefit from that, and just give what you can.
So before we close, final thoughts, questions, suggestions, ideas, poems. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Well,
Not
well.
Any final thoughts as before we close out?
You can share this film in your community. Shameless plug, tippingthepanescale.com, but thank you to APNC for hosting, but they will be showing it around the country, but it's also as an independent film. You know, if you appreciated the work, please tell some friends, tell others, and feel free. We only get to be seen right now until when people choose to share it with each other.
Thank you for everyone who joined us online, for everyone who has connected with us to this point, for everyone who is going to in the future. Remember that we will follow up. Please fill out your survey. I just can't say that enough. I promise you it will be used to help us drive things forward. This is how we are making decisions about what's important in the field across North Carolina. This is also how we're telling the story of what this looks like. So when we get done with all of these, we will also make sure you'll see it on the website. I am sure that you can see a compilation of high points from all of these conversations, and then what bubbles up for us as the most pressing needs and issues that need to be driven home, specifically in the policy and legislative space, but also in the what our communities need space. So thank you for joining, and we will see you again soon.